Okay, everybody, we're going to be hearing from Jesse, who is far away, so he's joining us virtually as well. He's taking the TED model of showing us a video. He is here in the background. Give us a little wave. Everybody can see you. Yeah. So once the introduction is done, there will be Q&A with a real living.
Jesse Grosjean. I work at Hog-based software. I'm an independent software developer writing programs mostly for the Mac. I'm going to talk about a series of plain text interfaces, sort of my thinking on plain text interfaces. My goal is thinking better with text for your own personal human-sized text. So not the world's knowledge, not collaborating with a team, but just banging out your own project plan or your to-do list, or maybe writing a novel, things like that. Personal projects, but how to organize them and work with them. So when I started out, I was really interested in human-computer interaction, and I got to work on some like zooming user interfaces and tree visualizations. And I was really interested, like there's, how do you organize your thoughts in this kind of tool? And it was really fun, cool, but in the end, I always found out that I was using TextEdit for my own. I had to think of something and bang out an idea of what I was going to do. I would use TextEdit, and it didn't have good overview plus detail like all the previous tools, and it didn't have a lot of things, but it was really familiar, and it presented stuff in a consistent way, information dense, everything great about just plain text. So that was a problem for a number of years, kind of working on one thing, but actually using another tool. Eventually, I finally got to work on the same tool that I was using, so that was nice. So WriteRoom. By this time, I was working on my own, and I had a to-do list outliner notebook kind of program that I'd been working on for a while, and it did everything I thought I wanted it to do, except for I still use TextEdit secretly in the background for most of my stuff. Users of that program wanted a full screen mode, which had become popular at the time. I think Ulysses, which is another text editor, had introduced it. And so I was going to add it to my notebook outliner program, but I didn't want to because it seemed like feature bloat. So instead, in a week, I just made WriteRoom, which was that same full screen feature, but not attached to any bigger program, just that's the program. And so that sort of became distraction-free writing, which is this idea of all you do is you launch the program and you see a full screen view with nothing. It blocks out all the rest of your interface, but you just see text, what you're typing. And a lot of people really liked that, and they bought it, which was great for me. And all of a sudden, my program that I spent a week on was selling better than my fancy program that I spent years on. But the nice thing about this program is I could actually use it too, because it was really just text edited. So I was like, I'm on to something. So I switched gears and started thinking, all right, well, what else could I do in it? Starting out with TextEdit and just adding a little feature to it, a little twist to it to make it more useful. And so getting things done was big at the time in Mac software. There were quite a few, which is a productivity kind of system. There were lots of different apps that were, all right, this is how you organize your to-dos and da-da-da-da. And so I decided, well, I do mine in a TextEdit. Let's see if I can improve TextEdit so that I can do my to-dos, but just a little bit better. And so the idea was you write your to-dos in plain text, but the editor helps you out by doing a little bit of highlighting and some structuring and stuff. And let me show you the specific things that it does. So here you start with plain text. If you put a colon at the end of a line, I call that a project. If you put a dash at the beginning of a line, then I call that a task. And anything else is a note. And so it's very freeform compared to a lot of similar tools. You can use it however you want. It should open in 10 years and probably a lot longer than that because it's just plain text. But just plain text, there's not a lot of structure. So task paper, when you type those different formattings, it gives you some visual structure. It makes projects bigger and gives them, this was one of the early versions of task paper, it gives it a nice gradated background so you can see what's happening. There's also a syntax for tags. If I type an @ symbol and then a word after that, that's a tag. And if you type a done tag, as you can see in the visual structure picture, it makes a strike through the line. So that's task paper. Once there's some visual structure, I also made it so you can focus in onto a particular project. So again, that's kind of the WriteRoom idea of block out everything you don't want to see, just get into the detail. And I also made it so that you could filter your text file. So in the last view, if you click on a tag, like for example, this is clicking on the done tag, then the view is filtered so you just see items that are tagged with done and the project that's associated with them. So that went well. I liked it. Other people liked it. And it seemed like it was a good model for me going forward for my interests. And so my basic principle from that point forward was to try to make programs that look and act like a text editor, but are backed by an outliner data model. So you can do things like focus into parts of the text, or fold parts of the text, or filter the tree, and then just experiment from there. So that's what I've been doing since then. And I'll show you 2 demos of the current version of task paper, and then another program that I worked on called folding text. All right, thanks. So 10 years later, this is task paper. I'll give you a quick demo of its features. So this is a project here to create items. This is the welcome document. If you delete that colon, then it's no longer a project. You put the colon back, there's a project, and it shows up over here in the projects menu. You can focus into a particular project by clicking on it. Go back and look at everything. It's just a plain text file. It's not like a normal outliner where everything's constrained, so I can select and say indent all that text as far as I want, or do whatever, and it doesn't constrain you like a lot of outliner programs do. But when you drag and drop things, it works like an outliner. Drag that there, drag it back here, do stuff like that. It also knows a little bit about your text. So in task paper's language, if something starts with a dash, it's a task. So if you click on that dash, well, it adds the done tag. So let's click on some tasks. And then you can click on the done tag, and it filters your outline to just show you the things that are done. Or you could do a search for the things that are not done, and it'll filter those things out. And this bullet here, it's lightly filled. That means there's stuff hiding here. That right there means that there's been an item filtered out. You can just click if you want to see it all, or just go back to home and you can see everything again. And that is task paper pretty much. All right. So this is folding text. After the first few versions of task paper, me and a group of people started working on folding text, which was supposed to generalize the idea of plain text into, so task paper is plain text to-dos. Well, can we generalize it to plain text productivity system? And I think it wasn't focused enough, and it didn't take over the world yet. And I'm back to working on task paper now, but I think it has some really interesting ideas, and hopefully I'd like to get them into task paper eventually, or in some other program. So in particular, folding text modes I want to show you. So again, the idea is that it works like a plain text editor. It is a plain text editor, except behind it's backed by this outliner data model. So you can fold that. You've seen that in task paper too, and lots of other programs. But what's interesting about folding text is we can add modes to make different parts of the document behave differently. So to-do, here's my to-do list. Eggs, milk, cheese, looks like task paper, but if I add dot to-do, that puts this item and its child items into to-do mode. Whoops, let's close that back here. And so in to-do mode, instead of looking just like normal bullets, we get nice little checkboxes like task paper, but now task paper is just this little mode in this bigger program. And so I can click the checkboxes, and that's pretty cool. And this mode system is extensible, so any mode you think of, if you can code it, sort of encode it in a system of plain text, then it works. And so this is my favorite one that actually, I like to bake bread a lot, and this solved the problem for me better than other tools. So bread schedule. So once you type schedule, all of a sudden it interprets all this text down here as a schedule. And so it's still plain text, but then it adds some, sort of the computer does some work and finds all, 30 minutes. And so at 5:22, well, that means the next ferment will be at 5:52. So the computer does all the math and presents this on the side. And it's all live. So I could say, well, let's say 30 days. Well, that's going to be a long ferment, and everything updates for me. Or I could say, oh, wait, I'm at this place. So I click here, and now it calculates backwards. Okay, well, if you're at this point right now, you must have started here. And so you can save it. It's just plain text. There's no metadata that's needed. But folding text knows how to interpret it and then present you some extra information. So anyway, I think that's a cool thing, and hopefully I'll work on it again. But right now, I'm on to simpler ideas. All right, thanks.
Question?
Thank you very much. I'm just going to record this session here. Make sure we get you fully. I'm going to try to turn the screen around.
All right.
We may lose something. Anyway, let's try that.
Whoops.
It'll come back. How's that? Can you see anybody?
I can't see, but I can hear.
Oh, right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, the
So-
camera's on there.
Somebody just give us a question while we turn this camera on,
Okay,
please.
so I want to know what this is written in.
Hi, it's Vince Cerf. I'm rather interested to know in what language you wrote the program.
Originally Objective-C stuff, but now most of my stuff is all JavaScript backend and then a layer of native stuff at the front layer.
Is it open source?
No, it's my livelihood. But I have open source in the latest tax paper stuff. I actually have open source the document model and a document model and a Swift wrapper around that. So like the task paper file format, there's an open source project to read it and manipulate it. But the actual editor I have to sell.
Okay, fair enough.
Other questions?
Adam. It's great that the questions are on this side. It's a bit hard to move the screen.
Hi, my name's Adam. So first of all, just a comment. It must be really satisfying to work on a tool that you can actually use and enjoy and become more incrementally productive because of it. So I really liked that part of the story about how you're creating all these whizzy tools but not using them. Went back to something really simple and just very gradually added things. So I really like that part of your story. So my question is, you said, well, now you're working on even simpler things. But since you're a software programmer by trade, my question is, I wonder whether you would start to expand it from kind of the to-do list, task management, into one step further, the plain text software space. I could imagine some cool use cases where you add a mode or something to your plain text software code, whether you're writing in JavaScript or what have you. So have you thought to, or have you actually started to use it or think about using it for the code that you write every day?
I guess I did, do what you were saying. So first of all, I made task paper, a few versions of it, and then I tried to generalize it, and I kind of switched the demo order, but the folding text, which was the schedule and stuff, that was, I tried to generalize it, and there were a number of issues that made it a big complex project that didn't sell extremely well. And so then I went back to focus on task paper, and it uses the whole data model that I was using in folding text, but it's just a simpler story to tell. This is your to-do list, and it's a simpler story for people to pick up. If you say, all right, this is your there's an old tool, the Canon Cat, I was inspired by that, which is this operating system that was just a text editor. And I thought, well, that's what folding text will be, but that's a really hard sell. And I would like to extend task paper eventually, but I'm not sure for what I do, kind of the idea is one thing, and then 99% of my time is polish. And so right now I'm just spending a lot of time polishing the test paper idea, but eventually I do expect to.
Jesse, we have one more question and very little time, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Just a comment first. I'm one of your customers from WriteRoom, and it was fantastic. But I just wanted to mention that org mode for Emacs is very similar to task mode. And so before you write a code editor into the process, if you were thinking of it, maybe Emacs is easier.
Yes, well, right here.
But you're not going to make any money, obviously.
But Emacs is easier. Like, I'm a programmer and I'm kind of a dumb one because I can't use Emacs. And very few people, I mean, it's something that people use, but I don't think it would be normal people would use it. You have to be an Emacs person or a VI person. And so I agree, if you're one of those people, I think my software probably isn't what you want because they already work pretty well if you're into that. If you know all the background, but it's a bit of hard background to get into.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much. We'll talk later.
Okay, thanks.
Bye. I need to stop recording. Let's go to off.
Should bring up the magic button.
Which button?
You get the magic button back that connects this to the screen.
Oh, and Carlos outside. The magic button.
Oh, I did it. I love it when that happens. Beautiful.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. So, my name is Craig Tashman. I'm with a startup called LiquidText. And to begin with, I want to ask, does anyone here do reading that involves highlighting, underlining, comparing different pages? Anyone by any chance? Yes, all right, most of us. That's a good thing. There's a term for that. It's called active reading, right? We do it all the time. It's what we do at work and at school. Second question. When you do your active reading, does anyone here prefer to do it on paper rather than a computer?
Yes.
Well, that is almost every hand in the room. You're not alone. 90% of college students agree with you. Vast majority of professionals agree as well. We're all in accord. We're all in agreement here because we know computers make poor active reading media. Paper makes a good active reading media. But we wanted to understand why. So we did this research. We went up and met with a bunch of engineers and designers and managers and executives. We ran these diary studies to sensitize them to their reading behavior. We interviewed them. We ran design workshops to really understand what's wrong with active reading on computers. And boy, there's a lot. We got this wonderful list of all the problems doing active reading on computers. Because again, we know active reading on computers is bad, active reading on paper is good, right? Well, actually not right. What we were really surprised to find is that paper shares a lot of the same active reading problems, or problems as an active reading medium as computers, and actually has a lot of its own problems as well. The upshot was paper's a poor active reading medium. It's just a little better than computers. Interesting. And so the story started to come together. We realized paper doesn't support active reading well, but all the computer technology, most of the computer technology we have, most of the software, is built to replicate and build on the experience of paper. But it doesn't work. You end up inheriting the flaws of paper, which are many, without inheriting the things that make paper work, which tend to be grounded in its physicality. So that leads to the question, though, what's the cause of this? What's the underlying deficiency of paper, and thus computers, that makes them such poor active reading media? So we can get some insights into this by looking at something called distributed cognition, developed by Ed Hutchins down at UCSD. And it tells us that when you have people and artifacts together, cognition actually emerges from sending information back and forth between these guys and by transforming its representation. Transferring and transforming. Well, that transforming part is the problem, isn't it? If you look at those problems I listed before, there were things like people had trouble rearranging their notes, connecting ideas to their sources. having enough space to write in the margin, being able to connect different ideas freely to show relationships. It's these transformations from which cognition is supposed to emerge, but paper's not very good at supporting them, and thus neither is computers. So in a nutshell, we find that computers are broken as an active reading medium because paper is broken as an active reading medium, because both lack the representational flexibility that people need. So for my doctoral thesis, we said, you know what? Let's start over from a clean slate. Let's create a reading medium built on representational flexibility. Let's build new interaction models, new interface metaphors, inspired not by paper, but by things that are characterized by flexibility, like fluids and putties. And to control all this flexibility that we're giving people efficiently, we needed a high-dimensional input medium, and so we chose multi-touch. We often think about multi-touch as a nice way to zoom your web browser on your phone, but the reason it's so good for that is because what it's actually doing is it's giving you a way to control high degree of freedom representations, or higher degree of freedom representations, without losing efficiency. So with fluid-like metaphors and multi-touch, we built a prototype and put it in front of people and looked at what happened. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, we've had the honor of being able to build this prototype into a shipping product, so I'm going to actually show you a demo from the shipping product, but just focusing on the features that were also in our early prototype. So to demonstrate this to you, let's take a little story. Thank you, sir. Let's take a little story. I want you to imagine that you work for Slack, local company, and you have to do some research on a competitor, Yammer, for a big meeting that's coming up. And so you're going to read this analyst report in our software. And so what are you going to do? Well, first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to see some important ideas. You might want to highlight them. Of course, you can do that here. But soon you come across a critical definition. You don't want to highlight it. You want to take it and snap it out into your workspace. You can keep an eye on it as you go. Later, you see something that builds on that definition. You're going to take it, snap it out as well, and actually connect these guys together. And notice what we're doing. Now we're creating these little fluid, very arbitrarily organized little groups of information. We're starting to restructure the text in a way that makes sense for us. All right, now we go on. Maybe we see the standard magic quadrant that every Gartner report has. Go on a few more pages, and then we get to the discussion of our competitor, Yammer. But I'm a little confused by this, but I think there's something earlier on that would help me in that magic quadrant. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take 2 fingers, squeeze the document together like this, to bring the 2 sections side by side so I can compare it. Wouldn't that be wonderful, right? So LiquidText is good about helping you see these different things side by side, but when you find a relationship, let's say this helps you, how do you capture that relationship? Well, normally it's tough. But we said, again, this is part of that restructuring, that transformation. So we said, if you want to capture a relationship here, select the material that helped you up here, select the material that helped you down here, hit comment. Oops, it would be good if I actually tapped on the thing I'm supposed to be tapping on here. Do that again. And hit comment, and write something like, helps me, for example. And then now I can take this, bring it over into the workspace here, and we'll go back to that a little bit more in a minute. Now let's say it's a couple days later, I'm all done reading everything, now I want to go over all my notes, go over everything I've read. Well, first of all, I made some highlights in this text here, so I might want to start by going over those highlights. And I could scroll, but then it's hard to see the big picture. We said, again, we want to let you bring the important things together. So you can turn on a little mode here, do that same pinch gesture, and bring all of your highlights together with as much or as little context as you need. Find the one that's important, expand it, get all the added context. All right, now we go over to the workspace here, and we say, you know what, this is important, but I forget where it came from. What's the source? Normally that'd be tough. Here, you touch the arrow, it takes you right back to the source. And if I say, what was that helped me? I don't remember. Touch the little arrow, squeezes the document together to show you both sources at once. So your comments really act as links and bridges. And we really generalize these ideas in a lot of crazy ways. You could, for example, hold your finger on one area of the text while tapping, hold your finger on one area while tapping the source of a comment, and it'll squish the text together to let you see both at once. You can actually hold your finger in the page of now a virtual book. And so we said, all right, this is good. This is good. Now let's say this and this give me an idea here. Well, I'll select them and write, say, my idea is ... and bring this over here. All right, now it's an hour later with a big meeting with the chief marketing officer and the CEO, and the CMO says, what's your idea? I tell her, here it is, and she says, what's it based on? I touch the arrow, takes me right back to the points that I pulled out that inspired it. Not the original text, but the points I pulled out, so I can build layer on my own thoughts. Now, the CEO then says, how do we compare to our competitors in terms of cost? Well, maybe I'm not sure. So I'll do a quick word search here for cost, and it finds all the occurrences of it. But then I can do that same two-finger pinch to bring them all together, see them at once. I can now effectively pivot my document on a word or a phrase. And when I'm all finally done with this, I can go export this as a nice little linearized outline. So we won't go into any more about the software, although it does quite a bit more than that now. But that's similar to what people had when we did the early studies. So we put this in front of people, a primitive version of this, and we said, do some tasks in this and in traditional paper and PCs. And what did we find? Well, in terms of affect, we found 75% of them preferred this prototype to the paper and the PCs they grew up with, an astounding number. And so we asked why? Was it our big screens, our wonderful selection gestures? No, the ergonomics were terrible. What people liked was that now they could arrange their content the way they needed to. They could view different sections of the text in parallel. They could see important text in the periphery, all these kinds of things. Likewise, it wasn't just affect, it was behavior as well. People who would normally write a couple of margin notes with this system would create, this is an actual screenshot from one of them, would create these wonderful interconnected networks of content. They were in effect creating an intermediate document between the source text they had to start from and the end result they had to compose themselves. And so I only have a couple seconds left, so what are the takeaways? Well, for those of you who are designers in the room, the first takeaway is there's a problem with active reading, even if you don't like what we built. There's a big problem. People are being let down badly by the solutions they have. So we need something. Second, we often think of reading as occurring here. It doesn't. It occurs here. If you want to try to solve active reading, the problem of it, you need to look at the people, the artifacts, the culture, how they represent information, transfer it, and transform it, and look to solve it at that level. And finally, as designers, we often want to strive for minimalism and getting rid of degrees of freedom. But in many cases, the best solution to a problem is actually to add degrees of freedom, to add more flexibility for the end user. And with that, I thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Wow. So,
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
no, that's back there. Okay, I just
Okay.
made an assumption.
I'm sorry, I'll get yours next. Sorry.
Just a quick question, Craig. Are the notes and the text that you select and pull out, those are fully searchable as well?
In the prototype that we gave people, no, that was not searchable. In the actual shipping app, we haven't added that in yet because there hasn't been as much demand for it as we expected.
Please,
But
God, do.
it will be in. It'll be coming soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now I can steal that.
Yeah.
So one of the things that the pinching, for example, is a manifestation of inadequate display space to first order. And so I'm wondering whether you've ever tried to experiment with this in a larger display space with multiple screens and so on, in order to see whether people's behavior changes because they have more display space. One of the nice things about paper is that it's cheap and you can spread it out on the table. You can see lots of things at the same time. One of the bad things about it is it's paper and, you get out of order and get lost and everything else. So how does display space figure into this?
Terrific question. And to give you a quick answer about it, the pinching gesture is actually meant to do something that spreading the paper out on your desk doesn't. We actually thought about that. The problem with spreading the paper on your desk is it's dangerous. You potentially lose the original linearity of the document. The point of the pinch gesture is to give you the ability to look at things 100 pages apart while totally safely keeping that original linearity. And I didn't show it, but you can actually have multiple pinches even at the same time. You can also do crazy things like holding your finger on a page while scrolling on the scroll bar with another finger. So you can effectively compare, very, very rapidly keep one area visible while scrolling through another area of the text. We've actually tried it on very large screens. We did some, our testing was done on a 17-inch screen. We played with it a little bit on giant 30-inch screens. But in terms of user studies, we've only really done it on 12 and 17-inch, and now the shipping product on the 13-inch iPad Pros. So we don't have tons of data on how that changes. It's a great question, though. Yes?
I'm Bill Dahl. I just wanted to say that I think if Doug Engelbart had seen it, he'd be impressed by what you did. Nice job.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all.
Lived up to the liquid
Well, coming from you, that especially means a lot.
name. Oh, something missing.
Yeah.
All right. You want to start talking while I click it?
So my name is Adam Cheyer, I know some of you. John Markoff recently wrote this really great book called Machines of Loving Grace that I felt kind of summed up my dilemma or my career in certain ways. He talks about artificial intelligence, AI, and on the other side, intelligence amplification, or IA. And I'm a person who's kind of bounced back and forth between those two and explored the tensions and the synergies all my career. On the AI side, a lot of people know me from things like Siri. So I was a founder, one of the founders at Siri. I'm a founder of a company called Sentient Technologies, which is a big machine learning AI company. And my latest project is called Viv, sort of an open Siri-like ecosystem and marketplace. And I was going to come here to talk about Viv, but I've completely changed what I'm going to talk about today, just because I think the people here will get more out of what I'm going to share. So even though I'm known maybe more on the AI side, I want to talk more today about the Doug Engelbart kind of inspired things that I've done. So I was involved in Change.org, which is one of the largest petition platforms for good, 150 million people trying to apply collective intelligence in a certain way to solve complex urgent problems, as Doug has described. And I'm going to show you a tool. The things that I saw today, like what we just saw here, and the really great talk about the plain text editor, these are tools people use every day to be more productive. And so I'm going to actually share, I was not planning to talk about this, but I'm going to share kind of my secret weapon, the tool that I use every day, that's Doug inspired a little bit, that I haven't yet released to the world because it's not quite ready. I've just been enjoying it so much myself, but someday, maybe with your help, I'll do so. So for those who don't know Doug, one of the things that really amazed me was, this notion of text and editors. He had, a somewhat primitive environment. It wasn't fancy graphics or anything, but there was some element to it that we've lost along the way. So today we have so many editors and places. We've got my code editor, we've got my text editor, we've got my just editors for everything, and they don't interact, they don't share. And for me, the notion that when Doug was writing software or writing papers and publications and doing every single aspect, bug tracking and issue tracking, it was all done in the same system. And there was a back end which had versioning and hyperlinking and scripting languages and all these kind of cool features, and it applied seamlessly across every aspect of a project. And I think once we splintered into thousands of editors, one can do outlining and one can't, we lost that commonality. So Emacs is perhaps the closest thing to it, but to the point that was brought up earlier, not a lot of people use it. So in the last few years, I've started a bunch of companies. They're all software companies. I'm a software guy. And so what I've done was I have a tool which I've created, which is basically a programming environment that shares a lot of what I thought Doug had in some way. So it's browser-based, so I can just log in through any browser at any time, pull up all of my projects, and have a common editor, versioning system, execution environment, programming language, everything I need at my fingertips that I can get to, and then I can collaborate and share. And I'll show you just a little bit of this now. And I want to apologize to people like Valerie and Eileen. Visuals are super important. I'm not a front-end person, so it's not pretty. But, So the name of my system is called Collaborama, and I use it in its simplest form. It has a command line, very much kind of like some of the tools that we saw, Liquid Flow, I believe. So at any point in time, for every document that I have, I can just type the name. If I need help, I type help, and I'm going to get to a help page. Or if I want to go home, I get to home, and there I can. So it's everything. Every page that I have is super fast and easy to access. It's also editable. So if I edit any particular page, like the home screen, it brings up in an editor where I can actually, if I have the right permissions, save to a particular place, or I can save it into a different place. Welcome to Adam's homepage. And now wherever I go home in the system, I'm going to my new updated version. So I can take any page, any program, and start to adapt it and modify it and just have the mods. And there's a path system where my local information overrides other information. So in addition to any page, so if I want to create something, I just type create. I can give it a name, B, and it can be of many different types. So I can have HTML or raw data or programming languages of different programming languages. Here I just type Adam. If I have a named thing and I say run B, and it gets me a simple data thing called this. And I might want to be able to pass it an argument, some particular argument, and do a computation. So say I have 2 arguments, and I create a little function called add. Now I can return A plus B. Except I can't type on this keyboard. You get the idea.
You can do it.
So if I now call it, I can pass arguments to my page or my function. Let's see it. 1, 2. I didn't. Anyway, I'm doing this live, but you get the basic idea.
Wait,
So you
where
can-
was the 3? I
Yeah,
was waiting
I
for
don't know.
the answer.
I might have had a different function called.
You named it
I'm not going to
Okay,
debug
alright.
here right now. Okay, I named it Ad. Anyway, so I can have full-on programs, including functions. The language is my extensions to a completely dead language. I'm the only programmer in the entire world of this language, but it's incredibly powerful. It's called, the original language was called Webble, and my version is called WebScript, but it does things like, if I want to get an argument, like I can pull any page. Find the shift key on this keyboard. So what's this? The future of text.org, for instance. I'm not going to do it live, but basically you have a whole algebra of sorts where you can say, take a page, you have structure, and say, get me all links that contain this pattern that come after a section that you have a very rich markup. You can turn anything into a web service. And not only as you do this, you can build entire websites. So for instance, if I go to perfectcartoon.com, a friend of mine said, you know what's needed in the world? We need to have a search engine for cartoons. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. He goes, could you help me write a spec? And I said, well, you're gonna need crawlers, you're going to need admin consoles, have staging servers. And then I just wrote the whole thing in a few lines of script because the programming language and environment has, it has everything you need from representing every single web page, style sheet. I can pull data, I can write crawlers in parallel in just a few lines of script. You can see I typed in dog, it's pulled out a quote from somewhere because this becomes a whole collection. If I do something like search quotations for dog, this is some script, some function that's now collaborative and shareable that any particular piece of software can easily use, discover, call. It manages versioning, so if the API changes, I can go to a specific API, etc. The last 2 things I'll mention, one is Collaborama is, of course, written in itself, so you can edit the edit function if you have the right parameters. So everything you see, if you like it, you can say, oh, that's good, but I just want to make it a little better. You can create a little sub-project, invite people to it, override the things that you don't like while keeping the rest. and then share it, and that could become actually more popular than the original version of it. And then finally, I've kind of started building all the tools that let you go through the full software lifecycle. So there are product managers who will have ideas that they want to create and requirements, so you can create projects, then you want to invite people to the projects, and they have this kind of gamified ways to discover the right people to start a company with, or skill sets. It's kind of like, but find the right people to work on it with. Then you go through developing, so you can create the software, having extreme reuse. You can then market it and actually have an ecosystem for being able to sell components, UI. And the idea is that throughout this entire piece, and I didn't actually mention it, but there's hyperlinking at a fine-grained level in every particular, in the editor, so you can have links, you can have rich presentation, etc. So it's kind of my secret environment where every document that you create, from code to specs, there's an issue tracker built in. It's kind of a collaborative environment. I use it to build all of my software projects as the prototype version.
Thank you. You've got questions. Valerie?
Wow. I see so much of, Augment's wonderful powers in there. It's really remarkable. I know you have a ton more things in there. One of the things that always was great when you would go to Doug Engelbart's office and he would bring up, for instance, I'd come in, he would bring up my name, and there would be this long list of everything I'd ever done, everywhere I'd ever worked, lived, all my phone numbers, every conversation we'd ever have. Do you also have some kind of a feature like that hidden in this treasure?
So there are, thank you. So there are databases that you can easily access through interactive scripting capabilities. There's basically search engine capabilities as tools. There's a whole variety, try data structures. I have this wealth of every tool and function I've ever needed for any project. I can pull from different places. So it just gives me this massive library of functions, content, infrastructure that I can easily and quickly combine into little software projects really fast. I say I'm a 50-year-old person who could probably walk into any hackathon competition and win, because I have so many built-in functions to do everything you'd ever want to do, and I can put it together instantly and quickly. And that's really one of my secret tools for how I can create ideas and then share them with people very, very quickly.
So I'm intrigued by the name, Collaborama, but what you demoed seems mostly like stuff that you do for yourself within your own. So are there additional collaborative features?
So the intent is to literally, you could imagine this be a kind of a GitHub on steroids, where it's not just a software repository, but it is the infrastructure, tools, and marketplace where anyone can come and contribute their capabilities, their content. They can sell it, they can team up, they can form groups, they can build new projects, they can market those projects. So the idea was really to be the next hub for software development that rethinks from scratch everything from conception all the way through marketing and execution, and changes the style of software is built. So I have very big ambitions. It's just this is my main day job. It's just something I've been tinkering with over a couple of years and never shown. But it's meant to be a very collaborative ecosystem.
So there's an obvious question about the way you use it now, where you have access to essentially everything, and a different environment where you have lots of different people involved, and some of them want to control access to their content and so on. There are probably a lot of features that you would need to introduce if they aren't already there in order to cope with the diversity of concurrent use by a whole bunch of people, some of whom are collaborating with each other and others whom are worried about violating everybody's software patents.
Yeah, so I think there are there are definitely notions of groups and visibility and permissions and sharing, and so everyone can get the views that they have. So some of that's built in. They can also choose, to say this is visible and only the API is available and it needs to be under these payment guidelines and things of that sort. So I think the intent, it's not all there, is that it would act very much like software does. Software components, some of it's like the person here, it's his livelihood, he's not going to give you a source code, some are open source, but you can customize, you can buy customized components that impact your experience. You can share, you can group, you can team. That's the intent.
So that was Adam, so now Adam.
Yeah. Okay, I'm done. Kia ora, my name is Adam Hyde. I'm a New Zealander, live in San Francisco. I'm talking about the other side of all this. I don't know much about Doug Engelbach, but I do understand that he talked about the co-evolution of human and technical systems to be able to collaborate, and we haven't really addressed so much the human part. So I'm talking about why collaboration is not really a technical issue, and I think the tool's already there, but we're not experimenting enough with collaboration as we can already do a lot. And my point is, I think that we need to experiment more with the tools that we have because we can go a whole lot further than where we currently are. So I'm a founder of the Collaborative Knowledge Foundation, which is a not-for-profit foundation in San Francisco. We've only just started. We have a team of 14, and we make only open source systems for collaborative knowledge production. And I'm just going to start off with this quote from Martha Woodman See. If you know her, she's a brilliant academic scholar. She talks about collaboration and how we've lost this art. And she says, as we move backwards in time, the collective, corporate, or collaborative element in writing becomes more pronounced, even more pronounced. And there are a number of people that have written on this. Jack Stillinger also, the notion of the single author genius and how it's a myth, and we should start looking at what collaboration really is. So I just want to go through this brief conjectural interpretation of her point. Before computers, we used to be able to interact with one another and work together. And collaboration over text was common, and it was killed progressively by the printing press, the notion of the romantic author, the single author genius, who we all hail as being the only producer of the text, which never happens, of course, and copyright, right? Simplified attribution, economic models that support just single authors. So collaboration over text production eventually died. When we enter the world of human-to-computer interaction, individualized text production is maintained pretty much by paper-to-document metaphors. Ted Nelson, of course, talks about this a lot, right? We just inherited the material object into the computer and didn't think about it. And with that went a legacy of production as well. And now we're in the age of the digital network, and we have human-to-human interaction via computer and networks. Technically, we can collaborate on a text. The whole vision of a shared screen already exists, right? We can do this. But magically, strangely, we're not better collaborators. So, what's going on? So the problem, printing press is gone. We can't blame that anymore. But romanticism certainly still exists. The notion of the genius and everything that comes with that. Copyright still exists, unfortunately. And then on top of that, we can layer the things that this has produced. Economics, career paths, policies that all endorse single author production and also diminish and obscure collaboration and our ability to collaborate. So our ability to collaborate on text has been damaged and it hasn't recovered. So how do we break down this legacy of individualized production and enter into a new age of collaboration? What facilitates collaboration would be the way that I would frame it. And I say, there's three things that we've been talking about. Is it in the human? Is it in the computer? Is it in the network? And for me, we don't need the technology. We already have it. We need somebody to help us regain this ability to collaborate. We need to overcome cultural issues, not technical issues. And we need skilled human facilitators. And that, in my opinion, that's the solution. So as a proof, I want to offer a methodology I developed called Book Sprints methodology. And it is a methodology where you go from 0 to book in 5 days. You start with absolutely nothing. You work with a group of people. Sizes vary between 3 and 20 people. you literally go from the title to a finished formatted book in 5 days, and no pre-production. And it's print ready and electronic book ready at the end of it, or if you want to dice it up into the web, go for it. The point being is that it's a bound, in the sense, structured narrative. And there's two types of these book sprints: extractive and generative knowledge production, I call them. Extractive is when you have something very concrete and you need to, write a book about it, like how to make a table. That would be an example of extractive knowledge production. Generative is when you need to come up with a new thesis or way of thinking, like the blue economy in Africa. It's a book that we did, for example. What does that mean? You get a group of people together and you work it out and you write a book about it. Book sprints methodology is a strongly facilitated methodology. And I'll come to that in a little bit. We talk about facilitation. We mean facilitation of dynamics, human dynamics, the facilitation of process, facilitation of anxiety within a group, and the facilitation of a product delivery timeline, because you're talking about 5 days, 0 to book in 5 days. It's a pretty hardcore product delivery timeline. And we've hit that mark, I have to say. It's not a promotional talk I'm doing, but we've hit that mark every time, 100% success rate. So just saying that you have to be very focused on these things. And you need to lead, the facilitator needs to lead people through the method, the book sprints methodology, right? Which basically looks like this: is 5 days on a 5-day book sprint. You go through concept, writing, and revision. It's just a very high level description. So what does it look like? So I wanted to show you these images more than I wanted to talk about it, because it's very, facilitation is an art more than a science. And I believe strongly that we need facilitators to help us to be able to collaborate. And I think that we're missing this very important ingredient in the number of projects that we undertake. So this is somebody working collaboratively on a book, right? This is one person, one computer. We use very simple interfaces, all open source, that we built ourselves as a table of contents. You can see a number of people editing various chapters. Okay, that's all pretty straightforward. Couple of people working together, right? And this is in Nigeria, isolated, working, nobody's really talking to each other. And I wanted to show you these first, because at moments it can look like this, which it looks like how you work in your office or wherever you are, right? Head down in the machine, doing what you need to do. And the important thing, I think, and we work with large and small groups, and we, sitting around sharing a screen, or you share it over the network. So this person here, and I'm going to show you a number of images with this red circle, this is the facilitator. And you can see a lot from where they are in the series of pictures to kind of get the idea of what they're actually doing and coercing and shepherding the group through a process. This is me facilitating a group, very small group, and you can see facilitator is like kind of in the background, right? And occasionally in a much more active role. This is Laia Ross, one of the facilitators. And, engaging with people, working out dynamics, helping them sort ideas out, getting them to think about certain things and how they might fall on the text, helping people negotiate semantics, concrete ideas, as I think somebody presented at the last Future of Text conference. Doing all of these things. And this person is notably not a computer. And I'll just show you a series of them. All right, sometimes in a little bit more of a directive role, but often in the background, helping people come forward. That's a very important part of it. It's a very interesting dynamic that you have as a facilitator, where you are shepherding people along. You're creating a very egalitarian production environment. You have to bring every voice up that's quiet and every voice down that's too loud. On that level, it's very strictly flat. But of course, on top of that is the facilitator, who's like pushing everything along, even though you might not even notice it. Often in these kinds of environments, people leave thinking, well, I could have done that. I could have been a facilitator. That's when you know that you've done a really good job, because they have no idea. You essentially are an emotional sponge during these things. Anyway, so I just wanted to bring these up. This is the facilitator, and I like this these photos at the end, because you can see this one particularly, the facilitator always hanging out in the end. People come into this experience, they think we can't produce a book in 5 days, it's not possible. They come out and they're almost religious about it, saying, yeah, that was amazing. The facilitator, who they always thought was in the background, here, voluntarily celebrated as being an essential core part of the whole process. Anyway, that's my offering. I think we're forgetting about facilitation. That's basically it.
How do you identify the facilitators? What kind of behavioral methods do you use to identify who makes a good facilitator? And how do you train them? Or is there a specific methodology, or do you go by behavioral screening and sort them out that way?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. I've trained 6 facilitators. 3, went through the whole process and didn't make it. And the other 3 are brilliant. Spent a long time thinking about who these people are before I even started training them. And the way that I train them is I bring them into book sprints, and I talk to them. They're there for 3 book sprints, the whole process. I'm talking to them through the whole process, explaining what's going on. And then another 3 book sprints where they take over the process progressively, and I'm in the background, and then I leave them alone. And so it's all in situ.
Do you use things like Big 5 personality traits?
No. This is all very gut feeling.
Okay.
No, I came from a small school in New Zealand. We're not big on these things. We go by our gut largely.
Here's the next question.
So I do a lot of, I use the word tunneling more than facilitation because it's come from in situ performance. And I just wanted to mention a resource to you and to everyone else. There's a podcast I did with Kevin Marks, who used to be here at Google, and Deb Schultz, called Tunnelvision.tv. There's 100 episodes that are about kinds of facilitated experiences in network, anything in a network, whether it's journalism or all kinds of things. And that's a lot of why I give the talk I gave, which is I think things need to be facilitated, but we don't have great tools. So it's really interesting to me that, like, I'm interested in wanting to know a couple things. One, how did you come to your own understanding of the relationship between tool development coming with this kind of lead of somebody who's facilitating? And secondarily, we always found when we did this podcast live that the people who immediately were obsessed with this idea and into it were from New Zealand, Canada, and the Netherlands, almost always, and a little bit Australia, and a little bit South Africa, like to a bizarre degree. So I'm wondering about your thoughts about why, if you have any, about that.
Weirdly, I've lived in all of those countries, so yeah, I guess I've just been mashed up. It's all been mashed up culturally inside of me. Yeah, I don't know. The tools, I very much believe in building very simple tools and then layering human interaction on top of it. Not technically, but actually working with people to get them to understand process and to be able to work together. That's way important.
Pete Forsyth, Wiki Strategies. I'm interested in, I guess the work that I've done that I think is the closest to what you talk about with the book sprints is, like in the Wikipedia community, very often with people who have a very deep-seated resistance to the idea of being facilitated. So I'm wondering how you address that kind of...
A good facilitator, and there's some around. Alan Gunn, he was my mentor. He is my mentor. If any of you know him from Aspiration Technology, I've worked with him a few times. You can see the gleam in his eyes when you see somebody like that. And that's a good facilitator. They're a little bit mischievous, and they love screwing around with power dynamics.
What are 1 or 2 techniques?
Well, one technique is to playfully work up people's anxiety. So for one, I won't speak to that specific scenario, but we have a lot where people say, in the beginning of the sprint, they'll say, "Is this even possible?" They're worried. It's all their peers, and they're looking to you as the answer, the god of the scenario, and you say, "Probably," and that gets them through it. So that's why you've got to be there to play with them. That's the important point.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I'm interested in whether there's a difference between an egalitarian group versus a hierarchical group, particularly in terms of very different levels of actually really different levels of expertise and knowledge.
Well, I wouldn't say it's expertise and knowledge, which is interesting that we've experienced. There's a couple of groups that we've found kind of difficult. One is ministers, and we've worked with politicians, and generally what they like to do is they like to be there in the beginning, and then they disappear, and then they're not there for the actual work, and you actually have to go and find the hotel room and drag them out. And the other one is not always, but sometimes academics don't like to collaborate. They'll sit there with their arms and legs crossed and say, no, because part of this process you go through deconstruction, authorship, and you lose the ownership of the text. And not all academics can deal with that. In the humanities specifically, they really often have trouble with this. Because the whole idea here is that to produce a book so fast, you have the mandate to change anything, and it's about social protocol. You have to engage with people if you feel they're going to be offended, but basically you can still do it. So, you have to manage these kinds of things, and this is very affronting for people who are really senior academics are past that point, but sort of mid-levels academics, that's where it sort of hurts. And
Thank you very much.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian Johnsrud from Stanford University. As the last formal talk of the day, I think I have 3 tasks ahead of me. First, I'm going to try to stitch together this ongoing thread we have about active reading, especially social and collaborative reading in the context of higher education. I'm also going to pick up on this metaphor we've had running as text as textiles, sewing, weaving. There's a lot of that built into Lacuna. And third task is to just keep us all awake. So here's hoping. So I work at the Stanford Poetic Media Lab. This is a digital humanities lab that I co-founded 3 years ago at Stanford. And what we do is we build reading, learning, and research platforms. We then design engagement with these platforms, particularly in higher education classrooms. We then observe the practice through surveys, interviews, and actual ethnographic observation in each classroom to really see where the rubber hits the road. How are these technologies actually changing learning outcomes? And that we're not just creating tools that are pretty and fun to use. They are also pretty and fun to use. And then we turn it back into research and development. But thankfully, everything we do is open source and free. So we also have the luxury of being away from the private sector and trying to generate profit. And we can sort of take our time and make sure that we're producing things that are actually doing what we want them to do. Our key collaborators at Stanford are another digital humanities lab called Text Technologies. We have 2 Stanford undergrads from that lab in the room today taking dutiful notes. And also the Stanford Lytics Lab, which stands for Learning Analytics. This is part of the Graduate School of Education. So again, we have a whole team invested in actually studying how these technologies are transforming classrooms. I'm very proud to say in about 3 weeks, one of our PhD students, Emily Schneider, will be defending her doctoral dissertation, which has been 100% on Lacuna and how it's transformed educational outcomes at Stanford and the local community colleges. So, Lacuna, why did I design and build it? I was really looking for something that wasn't out there, which is namely a platform that was originally designed for the humanities that can help students and faculty work together and collaborate in ways everywhere from the very beginning of the reading process, how they're engaging with text. The primary technology is digital annotation. And then going beyond digital annotation, how can you use those annotations to synthesize your ideas, organize them, do your writing on the site as well, and then allow instructors to really understand this whole step of the process. So as an instructor myself, I might see a student that's a great reader, but their final paper is terrible. Or the other way around, their final paper is really articulate, but they have no real evidence in there. And then I think, oh, it was the reading. They weren't really doing close reading. So how can I really observe that and help guide them along those processes? So I'll show you a couple of interface grabs from some of the parts of the site. This is what digital annotation looks like. So it's super blurry, I apologize. So a student has a text here. They can highlight a selection of the text and see if another student has annotated it. Then they just simply grab a selection of the text. There's a little pop-up button, and then they can write their own annotation. What's really key here, especially if we're designing for classrooms, is you always have to protect students' privacy. Not just because you want them to be able to have the freedom to, make their own personal annotations and keep reading a personal process. But also we have things like FERPA, the Family Education Rights Protection Act, which mean it's really great teaching with open source tools, but if you as the instructor or an institution don't control and protect that data, you can run into lots of problems. And then also for students, they wonder, you're kind of making me go out and annotate these texts and other people are seeing them and I kind of feel like I'm forced to use this technology. We then have something on the site called a sewing kit, from which you can create threads. And this was sort of our biggest innovation, was we saw a lot of annotation tools out there, but what do you do once you've made 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 annotations over the class? And now you want to go and write your paper. So the sewing kit, you can see all of the annotations you've made. You can filter them by category, by tag. You can see other annotations from students and the instructor that have been made visible to you. So at the end of the class, you can step back and say, I've made 10,000 annotations over 50 books and 100 articles. Show me all of the ones that have the tag globalization, gender, and violence. And now I have all the annotations to write a paper on that topic. I can turn them into a thread, organize those materials, and then share that thread with the instructor so they can go through it and say, this looks good, you don't have a lot of evidence on this part, you might want some other annotations here. And like everything on Lacuna, you can make it public, so you can have students creating threads together or commenting on each other's threads. You can then import them into a writing interface on Lacuna so that students can then take all of those annotations, put them into a writing interface, directly cite using a digital citation bibliography manager on Lacuna. And then just like all content on Lacuna, students and instructors can annotate their essays as well. So you can put up a first draft, and instead of having that process of your student handing you the essay, you take it home, you mark it up, you give it back to them, you can just in live time annotate and say, this doesn't make sense, add a topic sentence, or have peer-to-peer evaluation. One of the coolest things about building a platform like this is you have all of this data that students didn't have otherwise and you as an instructor can have. So here's a live D3 visualization where you can click student by student, how many annotations have they made, what kind of annotations, how long are they, what tags have they been using, at what point in time have they really been engaging in the class, and then what texts have more annotations on them as well. So it allows you to then communicate with students and say, looks like you've done about 10,000 highlights and 5 annotations. I'm not sure you're doing the closest reading. As I mentioned earlier, Lacuna's free. It's up on GitHub. It's run on Drupal, so we have a number of institutions that can just quickly download and install it, take it, make it, break it, use it for your own institution's needs.
Oh, all the way back up, okay, yeah. Robert.
Bob Belford speaking. I also created a course management system with Drupal, and I was wondering if you could describe the use of Drupal for making a course management system a little bit.
You bet. Drupal's just a content management software like WordPress, but I like to think of it as like WordPress on steroids. So it's really great for educational use, A, because it's a lot more secure than WordPress, which is usually what instructors go to just quickly throw up a site. But also for a project like this, it handles data and databases really well, so that you can flip that data out, both for the research side of things, but then to give it back to students. So if you want to do something like, how many annotations have you made, how long have they made, Drupal makes it kind of easy to do that. It also just happens that Stanford runs most of their sites on Drupal. So there's usually a lot of higher ed tech support for Drupal-based projects.
I suppose I could have asked other people this question, but I'm curious about whether you use voice annotations at all, or audio annotations.
Yeah, we don't have that on our plugin. We do have students doing text-to-speech for their annotations, so you can do that. It's mobile and tablet accessible, so we have quite a few students reading on and annotating on iPads, and so then they'll use the little text-to-speech button. But you also can annotate in ways besides text. You can paste in a URL of any image or YouTube clip, and it's embedded in the annotation. So when you hover over text, you'll see links out, sort of like Hypothesis. You'll see links out, embedded images, videos. Yeah.
Great, Tashman. This is really awesome stuff on a lot of levels. One quick question. So I like all the analytics that you have. Do you ever reflect those back to the students about the class? They can say, oh, here's how I relate to the class, here's how the different classes relate, or would that be too competitive for this context?
Yeah, from the very beginning, students have been able to see that dashboard. So it's on the menu, it's called Annotation Dashboard. They see themselves at the top, and then they can click a button that says View All Students. Wow. Again, this came from iterating. First they saw everybody, and then we thought, well, we don't want it to be too competitive, but some students like to be competitive, so they can opt in. But they don't see other students' names, they're just given numbers. So you see your name and you say, oh, I'm the 3rd highest annotator in class. so you can get a sense of how you're doing. Yeah, the whole ethos of the site is giving the tool over to students as much as possible, and even their writing on the site, the icons are the same size, you can interact with it the same way. So the course materials and the writing that the students do, sort of aesthetically and philosophically, have the same weight and importance.
Very clever.
Yeah, thanks.
Can I ask about the institutional backstory to this?
Yeah.
What was the support or what was the impetus behind a project like this getting started?
It was great timing on my behalf. About 3 years ago, it was about 5 years ago when I was finishing my dissertation at Stanford. I was doing an interdisciplinary dissertation that was asking how people engage with narratives across media types in the 21st century. So I wanted to build a platform to understand how that happens and to capture that data. So that was sort of the baby of Lacuna. And then Stanford had just created this cool new vice provost position, the vice provost for online learning. And in a leap of faith, they gave me a pile of cash to turn Lacuna into a beta test for classrooms. And since then, it's been supported by a lot of different foundations, U.S. Department of Education and large grants. But essentially, Stanford keeps funding my lab to not just expand it out of Stanford, but to really test it at state schools, community colleges, and different student demographics so that just personally I can feel like any institution that takes it, I know that if they've got a large group of English as second language students, for instance, that they're using the tool in a meaningful way. And then on lacunastories.com, we have a knowledge base with a huge bank of sample assignments, classroom activities, lesson plans. So if you think, this is a great tool, but how would I actually use it for this? We've got print and go assignments that you can just give directly to your students or edit to customize.
One more question?
It's very cool. I want one.
Take it, it's free.
My question has to do with the educational and analytics potential. Is there a backend where you're looking to see how the reasoning and collaboration is developing among students, so you might be able to encourage that, especially at Stanford, where one of the complaints is people who get in there are very competitive people, and it's hard to train for collaboration. So I'm wondering if this might be a way into that.
So we do a lot of that on the lab side of things. We gather student annotation data and do independent research. But we're trying to figure out models of shooting that using natural language processing back to the instructor. So the PhD student I was mentioning earlier has been working with a postdoc, and they've been coding a bunch of annotations that we've had students make that meet, for literary studies, categories of close reading. So this is sourcing a document, this is looking for literary devices, and they're coming up with these algorithms to sort of find those patterns and say, chances are this annotation is finding a literary device. So there'll be another metric where you can see, again, not as a beginning and end metric, but just as a gateway into what your students are doing. They've made these many annotations, here's the length and everything else, and it seems like 80% of them are this kind of close reading activity, 20% are this kind of close reading activity, where then you can have a conversation with the student on the quality of annotations that they're doing. Yeah, you can also directly reply and respond to students on their annotations, and if they want, they get a little email notification that says, instructor so-and-so just directly responded to one of your annotations. You can have that kind of direct conversation as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're almost at the end. Waiting for all the screens to come back up.
Frode, are you going to open the floor to just general questions?
Yeah, I think we'll do exactly something like that. First of all, Ria, can you come here? So Horia and I would like to thank Vint. Can you please stand up even though everybody knows you? Denise, who's not physically here, Google in general, and my darling wife Emily. We've been very the Institute of the Future. Where is Alex? Is he still here? Yes. And Wiki Strategies. Today, just quite wonderful. What I would like to do now is we're going to have a few minutes of dialogue in a group. Vint, can we have a few minutes and then we open up for everybody? Would you join me? Where's the other microphone? Right here. Okay. I'd just like, with a few observations, depending on whether you're a client or a creator, today was either inspirational or quite depressing. It really was. I mean, for me, it's like, obviously I know most of the presenters' work. I mean, to see Brian's work at the end, it's depressing because it is useful, but even though you've opened it up in so many ways, it is not everywhere. That's a bit depressing, and to look at my competitor software developers, then Adam comes in and shows off an entire world without even, I'm not even going to go down that path. It is kind of depressing, but I think what is more depressing, and I would really like your perspective, and then we open it up, is yesterday we had a little group chat, and Bob Stein looked at me and said, Frode, I think you think that text is this. And I took great offense to that, because I have to admit that he's right.
What's wrong with that?
Well, the thing is, we looked at LiquidText, we've looked at so many different ways of doing it. I don't know how you guys feel, but do you share the emotion that you've seen lots of possibilities, but there is cognitive dissonance? It's like we've learned that text can be something else, but we don't actually know what, right, as a concept. I mean, we've gone in and out of images and audio and all these things. That's great. Of course, there has to be something like that, but what really comes after this? I've got a bit of a headache, right? And if you could, I'm not sure drugs would help, but if you have any perspectives, I would appreciate that. And then we would really like to have some more commentaries, especially for people who've been doing a lot of listening and haven't really had a chance to talk yet. Could you come up here?
Okay. Thank you very much, Frode. I think we should thank Frode for an extraordinary job. This is things like this are part performance and part incredible hard work. And if you noticed him dealing with every little technical glitch that came along very, very quickly and smoothly, it's astonishing. So thank you very much, Frode, not only for that, but for putting this together in the first place and inviting us all to participate. I also want to acknowledge Carla and Denise, my two staff people who made this behind the scenes, got you fed, made sure you got into the building and have your labels and everything else. So thank you very much again. I want to start out by suggesting to you that, well, let me tell you how I view the day, and then we'll find out how you view the day. But I see this as if you are a collection of explorers and surveyors, and you have gone off and explored the landscape of ideas in this space, and now you've shared with us what you found. In some cases, what you designed and built, but from the conceptual point of view, you found things and you shared them with us. And this is a wonderful thing because it saves us the trouble of having to go out and do that all ourselves. Inventing everything that you've done would take forever and ever, and of course, for most of us, we wouldn't think of all those things. So this kind of exploration and reporting has been extremely helpful. I have a few takeaways that I thought I would share. The first one is that we have gone from a space where we used our hands and pens and chisels and so on to construct text to these software facilitated tools. And they are simultaneously very, very helpful and irritating. They're helpful because they let us do things that we couldn't do using conventional materials, pens and ink and so on. They're irritating because they get in our way. And a theme that I thought was repeated over and over again was, how do I get the software to get out of the way to allow you to do more direct manipulation of the thing we call text? At the same time, I think we recognize that it is the facility to manipulate that that these software packages give us that we don't have in the physical medium. And so we're still struggling as a group to figure out how we give ourselves this ability to manipulate text and yet not have that software get in the way, because how many times have you been trying to get something to be formatted properly and you don't know how to tell the damn package how to do what you want, where you could have just typed it with a typewriter. And, you talk about having headaches.
Stop using Microsoft Word.
So the software is getting in our way to some extent. Second thing, which I thought was very evident, is that many of you, including me, are struggling to find ways to make the production of text more collaborative. At Google, we have this, I'm going to say relatively simple, although the people who wrote the code don't feel that way, text environment. But it does allow concurrent use and editing of the text. And I will tell you that from the standpoint of group work, I have found the ability for multiple people to be talking to each other, to be seeing each other in a video conference, and interacting with the text to be extraordinarily effective if there is goodwill to come to a conclusion, as opposed to, you idiot, that's the dumbest thing I ever saw, and the text never quite settles. But I've seen people complete op-eds, a few thousand words, 2,000 or 3,000 words, in extremely short order. Even though they're fully distributed, they're not face-to-face, because of the ability to communicate with each other and see the results, try out ideas, argue over one formulation or another. So the collaborative and interactive element here is extremely powerful if we can achieve it. I think what would be very useful as we finish the day, to find out from you what insights or surprises you encountered during the day. Because each of you has this enormous amount of background, and so knowing what insights were new for you and knowing what things were surprises would really, really help us focus on which parts of the landscape we've explored struck people as being special. Now, I will tell you, I have one idea which I would really like to have happen. If you're like me, software doesn't always work the way you think it should, or the way you expect it to, or the way you want it to. And so the thing that I now realize I want and don't have is the ability to turn on the video and the audio while I am using a piece of software, so that I can vent my ire on whoever the hell it was that built that software, so that in the end you can actually show whoever it was what happened to you when you were trying to use it. Now, this is true for web pages, this is true for interactive programs, especially true of trying to fill out forms and trying to create text. And I really think that we should have that built in to all of the software environments we're in, so that you can then package that up and forward it to whoever supplied that piece of software, so they get a real live experience of what it was like for you to use their software. And so if somebody is capable of doing that, I think it would be a terrific product, and I would encourage building it. So let me ask you to tell us a little bit about what struck you as particularly insightful or surprising. Let's see if we can come out with an interesting summary of the day that way.
I found all the presentations really astonishing, and I got something from each one. But And I think what I miss a little bit is my is, and I think it's also embedded in how you sum things up, is that we're looking at the future of text through a lens of technology, and I don't know if that's the right way to look at it. I think even in the way that you phrase collaboration over remote networks and things, I'm not sure that you're really putting a large emphasis on the technology and then we'll work it out, right? And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. And I think that what would be really interesting in future symposiums would be to look at more of how do actually people work together to produce text, because that's what we're trying to achieve. But that's kind of like the thing that's not being discussed.
Could I mention something about Doug Englebart's laboratory that I remember? He wanted to have people seated so they could see each other. They were seated around in a kind of a round table arrangement, so that when they were working on their knowledge production, they had a visual eye-to-eye contact in addition to whatever it is they were doing with the computers and the screens below them. And I think that's part of a very productive environment. Yes, sir?
I'll tell you what was most surprising for me. I think it's only in the intellectual arrogance that can happen in a group like this that you can say that my word processor is getting in my way. I don't know how many of you started life writing programs using IBM punch cards. There's very few of us. And you undoubtedly recall what it meant when you made a typo. You started over. And you probably recall the cycle of putting the punch cards in a stack and waiting for a day or two before it ran, only to find out the program didn't run anyhow.
That was called bitch processing. As I
And so, along comes these IDEs like Eclipse or JBuilder or whatever, and I got a typo, and the little thing turns it red and tells me I got a typo. And I don't even have to wait for the compile cycle to know that I got a typo. And now some of them, you didn't have copy and paste in punch cards, You didn't have a button called refactor and move it or change the signature or whatever. So from my perspective, I think the bigger picture that we fight is the human illiteracy gets in our way more than our tools. And so that's my surprise.
Okay, that's interesting. I hope that you were not going to the place that said, well, at least we've done better than punch cards, because I hope we're a lot farther along than that. So, okay, other insights. I see Eileen's got her hand up.
And then there's got to be something from somebody who was not an analyst. If you don't volunteer, we'll start picking on people.
I'll be brief. I was just remembering of one of the Engelbart stories about when he went to the conference for librarians, and he said, I'm just telling you, our prediction is that there will be the end of the book very soon. And he said, everybody booed him. And at the time, this was, 20, 30 years ago or something, it did seem like a sad, headache-giving thing. But today, I feel like I saw, like they say, like Engelbart was like coming over the mountain, like Moses with the tablets, but we couldn't see. I kind of saw that potential. And a lot of this wasn't brand new. A lot of it Doug thought of, Bonnie's been doing 3D worlds forever, but everything is maturing and maturing together in a way that offers real potential for the future of the book, which of course is this very dynamic, interactive, new kind of text, which we're not there yet, but I felt like we're getting there. Felt very optimistic. Yeah.
So while we're looking for the next comment, one thing that's missing from a lot of the tools that we heard about today is the ability to sketch. I noticed that I draw figures and small diagrams and things like that in the margins of the books I read now. I used to not touch books. I thought it was a crime to deface them by writing on them. And I have changed my mind entirely about that, and I scribble all over them, partly because it's a conversation with the author, and partly it's a conversation with myself. And so sketching was missing from a lot of what we talked about today, and I would really value finding a way to do that. There are some slates or tablets that look like they have pretty good ability to allow you to sketch. So maybe I don't know about you, but it feels to me like we are edging our way into a new era of text manipulation. We're not quite there. We've got bits and pieces that we heard about today, but it does feel like we're not far away. Next comment, where is it? There we are.
So I'm Grace. I'm one of the folks who was here with the CESTA contingency to take notes and observe. I thought the point that Freud made at the end about text as a concept being represented really differently here and disparately by different presentations is really interesting, because I think that one of the things about digital is that it very much blurs the line between like what counts as text, what counts as calculation, what counts as data, and what counts as image. And like, is image in motion? Since like your pixels are like constantly reloading, like what is animation versus static? And I thought one of the really interesting things here is that despite like a lot of the kind of forward thinking that's happening, it's also a lot of effort to kind of model print books digitally and like more efficiently model print books digitally. And while there like was some thought being put to like expanding the definition of text, there wasn't always. And I thought that was an interesting phenomenon.
So you put your finger on something I find really fascinating. Look, remember scrolls? And then we got random access scrolls, that's called a book, right? And we got organizational structure out of that with chapters and pages and paragraphs and lines and so on. Now we have this mechanism that allows the text to be presented in variable font and in variable ways. And the result is the organizational structure and referencing structure is going to have to adapt, and we're not there yet. We don't have a good adaptation to the richness of the text that we can now present in this online environment. So I think that's another revolution that we need. Yes?
Hi, my name is Claire Tandy. I'm also part of the CESTA contingent. And kind of one of the takeaways I had was our project specifically has been looking at the evolution of text technologies and looking at the history and how it's, evolved for the past, 5,000 years or so. And one of the really interesting things about, and one of my takeaways from today is about how digital as a form of text technology really allows for the, taking out of the implicit information, looking at it and seeing it, and how that's a really unique adaptation that kind of almost does start to move beyond books in terms of how you can layer it and immediately see it kind of with the LiquidText at the end where you can pull things together, how that really kind of moves beyond in ways the codex, the book, and so I think that'll be really interesting to see in the future and how that continues to evolve.
The analytic ability that computers have to read more than we can and help us see relationships that we don't have time to form ourselves, I think is transformative, and that's going to be fascinating. Other comments? We have, who's got the microphone? Oh, there we are. Please go ahead.
Is it working? All right. Hello, my name is Leo. I'm currently doing research on human-computer interaction in Stanford. So I think my best takeaways from today's conference will come from LiquidText, because I especially really like the emphasis on how say the paradigm of how when we work with text, how the paradigm of reading and transforming the information that comes from the text itself has changed so much, and how tablets or computers today are a form of created based on the text that we wanted to create and represent somewhere online or digital. And so far, because we didn't have so much insight maybe before, we failed to actually realize the transform part that is really important to in changing and manipulating these documents. So.
Thank you. We have other comments over in this direction. While you're getting there, I have an anecdote for you. On the weekend, I decided to pull a science fiction book out of my bookshelf. It cost me 35 cents back around 1960 something or other. And it was, frankly, turning a little brown, and it was starting to fall apart. And I was trying really hard not to wreck the, book. And finally, I gave up and downloaded a copy from Amazon for $6.99, and then blew the text up so I could read it without my glasses on. And I remember thinking, wow, that was backwards. I went to all that trouble to keep the damn copy, the hard copy, and I bought another copy anyway because it was easier to read. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ben. My name's Kenan, and the thing that actually struck me the most was when you were talking about we have to change our business model for how we archive far into the future, which is a humanity-wide question, right? And you pointed out churches and breweries, and you sort of gave a very quick turn of phrase to something that I think is a key issue. It's like so huge, that question. But I was playing with it a little bit, just sitting here waiting to ask the question. I'm just going to throw something out, and it might be very wild, but if you think about the church, if you think about breweries, there's an aspect of it that's very individual, and an aspect that's very social.
Yes.
And if you think about text, I know the most amazing movie I ever saw was a book I read. It was Ghost Story, and the images that I had. And when we read text, we're creating a very unique human story in our own head, a narrative, right?
Yes.
But maybe part of what some of the really interesting talks that I saw about the the emotional part and also facilitation, it's that stretch into making that very individual experience also the social one.
Yes.
And so I think that one of the key things that's missing right now for so many really great advances for all of society is we haven't yet figured out what that business model is, because we're working on a business model instead of what's the bigger purpose, what's the bigger contribution at a humanity-wide level.
And in fact, thank you, that's a really lovely insight. You'll notice that Andrew Carnegie decided to break the business model of the publishers by creating public libraries where people could borrow the books for free. He was not widely welcomed by the publishing industry, at least not initially. And yet, what we recognize is that by doing this, we actually encourage people to read, in which case they have an appetite for more books, and therefore the industry benefits. But it didn't look that way originally, so maybe we do need new models. Yes, sir.
Hi everyone, my name is Nguyen, and a few thoughts that I had from the listening to them today was, one is a level of intimacy that we have with the text. I remember as a student, the best thing I found is when I go to a library and I pick up a book, and then I found out the scribble on the margin is one of the best experience, that I'm just not interacting with the author or also someone else who has read it before me.
Yes.
But then the way that book is distributed is that everyone receive a blank copy, just you and the author. That's just how the books are sold. And I always find that there's just added emotional value whenever a book is read by one more person. It has a lot more value than a book that has not been read. And I have not seen how that could be addressed. How do you compound the value of a book through different readers? And that has not been addressed. So that's one point. The other point that I found, and I think all of us know it, anyone who has written anything know that writing is much harder than reading. Which is the most ridiculous thing ever, is like, why is reading so fast and writing is so slow? And I thought about that all the time, and I realized that the more that the reader can empathize with the feeling of the writer, the better the interaction could be. And I've not seen that in anything that we mentioned. How can the reader have the experience of the writer?
Actually, I have a slightly different observation about this. P.G. Wodehouse is one of my favorite writers. He makes everything look so smoothly. He must have just sat down and written this. But you hear that he sweated bullets on every word in order to make it look like it was easy. to write, but you're right, it's hard. Yes, ma'am.
Just one point that didn't come up today, so I might make Freda happy by complaining because he wanted people to be angry. I'm not quite angry. I'm just slightly pissed off that we're still where we were in some ways what Ted was struggling with, because the only thing we saw today that was non-linear was Xanadu. So we're stuck with a relentlessly linear text, and our experience of text is not always linear. And the hypertext system that I worked with in 1986 let me represent things with multiple different versions of causality and multiple outcomes, which was excellent for modeling things like accidents, reconstructing causation and accidents from multiple perspectives, multiple outcomes. And I was able to do that on software that ran on the original Mac with a single floppy disk drive. And if I needed, I was stupid enough to write my dissertation in it. And then you could export the whole thing if you needed to for a conventional dissertation, which I also did. But you could have multiple representations of the text that were mutually exclusive in some ways. And we're different constructions of, as it were, reality, right? So we're stuck with an objectivist linear paradigm where we're still using the term above and below and footnote, which go back not to codex, but to papyrus. And so, in a lot, why didn't we hear more frustration about linearity rather than just manipulating the surface of text? Text itself is an interface. It always has been.
Yeah.
I think an answer to you has to do with the notion of narrative. And for many people, narrative is a linear sequence as opposed to the much more challenging notion of an exploration of two-dimensional or three-dimensional landscape. And so our brains we struggle, I think, to cope with multiple possibilities, somehow trying to keep them straight in our heads. I like the idea of using this non-linear narrative for particular cases, especially where you're exploring potential future outcomes.
But that's what the gaming industry
Or how did something happen in
Yeah.
the past? What possible different explanations are there? So that's a really interesting idea.
That's part of the seductiveness of the
Yeah,
gaming industry,
yeah.
if you think about it, is multiple outcomes. You get to replay the scenario.
That's a very insightful observation. Where's the microphone?
Well, talking about gaming.
Yeah.
First of all, I heard a lot of very insightful talks today. And texts are here to stay. Everywhere I go, people use this to read and write more than talking. Talking about gaming now, we could make collaborative reading fun, like like we say, sketching, and well, the gamers have done that for years. Collaborate, reading, playing games. We could do that with reading too. And I think that's possible.
Well, that's what graphic novels are, sort of ish.
Real time.
Yeah,
We're only small comments now, please, because.
very quick. When I was extremely inspired to see Adam Sheyer's writing platform that integrate coding and writing, and I would still love to see some of Engelbart's ideas, like being able to color code words for parts of speech for faster reading comprehension. I'd love to see Doug's ideas about concatenating ideas into symbols so that you could pull apart arguments, and a lot of those things that he talked about in the 1962 paper, and I thought, oh, for the first time I see a way to do that, so I was inspired by that.
Okay, we got one more comment in the back there.
Yeah, really great for running very late.
Yeah, I would like to see another chance of moving forward and integrating all these skills that have been developing for many years into like Google Outreach, okay, to work on urgent complex problems. And there has been substantial success from Augment MLS. It was transferred to the Institute of the Future, and who actually bought out the program called Notepad International, Renwick Breck. He was a major humanitarian. He got support by our government, NASA, SRI, EPRI and all that. And he became an American hero in the Soviet Union on the Armenia earthquake for saving millions of lives through satellite internet collaboration on situation awareness and disaster relief. Also on the Chernobyl, and before that was a Loma Prieta earthquake. So there's a person that championed this for doing like Google outreach challenges, and I think we need to move forward with that. I'm disappointed because NSF seemed to drop funds from Doug, okay, and Xanadu seems to be stuck, and I think these organizations need to move forward. So the world needs it.
That's an opportunity.
Okay, is there any really brief, yeah, we haven't spoken very much.
Just super quick, I don't want to have like another like Palm Pilot graffiti thing. Like I want to be able to express symbols in like, yeah, I mean, I just want to have space. I want to have a whole host of different things. And when I see virtual reality and augmented reality, like I just feel like that is like when you play with tilt brush and you actually look in 3D through your own view, you can't help but get a visceral sense that there's something more to how we express ourselves symbolically. So I'm really excited about spatial representation of ideas and like actually vividly experiencing memory from other people as they experienced it, and not just through like a very kind of linear historical sort of thing.
Why does that sound like the pensive from Harry Potter?
There you go.
The other thing is also I don't back to the graffiti thing. That's like I don't want to have to. I think this is just a common design thing, but I don't want to have to put in a hashtag and like. I know that there's competing things about like Doug's view of this, of how we would eventually adapt, but I don't want that. Like I want it to know what I want. Like I think the combination of like biometrics and machine learning to be able to understand what we want to do and for it to figure out how we want to express ourselves, like I think the technology should serve us in that way.
Well, there's a challenge for artificial intelligence, that's for sure. One final thought from me anyway, since I need to get to another meeting, is that the kinds of artificial intelligence that we're starting to see emerge may actually have the capacity to turn computers into real assistants that we can interact with the way we interact with each other. And if we get to that point, I think a richer opportunity for collaboration among people and with the aid of computer power will really project us into a very, very different future than we experienced in the past. So, Frode, I need to run off to another meeting, so I'll turn this back over to you. But thank you very, very much again for organizing all this, and thank you, Carla, and Maria, and Emily, for helping make this such a thoughtful and insightful day.
Thank you. Okay, now that I got both mics, there's just two things remaining. One is, when you leave here, please tidy up, because otherwise I have to. And the last thought that I really just want to impregnate into your minds, all of you, is just something that I think is really important. Some people say that the most fundamental thing in the universe is information. I would say the most fundamental thing in the universe is interaction. Because if you have a something and it doesn't interact with another something, it has no properties. So when I talk about pivots and we all talk about different things to do, it's the most fundamental aspect of our existence. It is what creates information, and if we don't imbue our everyday information with interactivity, we're losing out on what information could be. Thank you very much. We'll be having some drinks in the main room.